Public CEO Report is a podcast that provides insights about the public sector and public policy for the benefit of decision makers and leaders powering our communities. I'm your host, Ryder Todd Smith, and today we're joined by Jayson Braude. He's Chief Counsel at Kiley and Associates. Jayson, welcome to the Public CEO Report.
Thanks for having me, Ryder. Appreciate it.
Good to have you here. So you and I have gotten to know each other through conferences and whatnot. I actually first heard your name because I was talking with one of my client cities, and he started raving about this federal lobbyist he'd been working with, and dropped your name. And then probably a month later, I ran into you at conference. I connected a face to the positive comments you had received from this client of yours, and I was like, oh, great, the world is connected. So it's great to have you on the podcast now and talk. For the benefit of my audience, could you just tell me real quick what your organization does, Kiley and Associates, and your kind of background and history?
Sure. Well, thanks again, Ryder. Well, yeah, so my name is Jayson Braude. I am Chief Counsel at a lobbying firm that is based in Washington, D.C. called Kiley and Associates. At Kiley and Associates, we focus helping cities, special districts, counties at the federal level with all types of lobbying. If it comes to funding opportunities, problems that cities are having at the federal level, tracking legislation, et cetera. So we're a full service federal lobbying firm, and we represent small and medium sized cities up and down California. My background is I came from California originally. I do live in Washington, D.C. now, where I live and work, but worked for 2 Congress members from Southern California and 2 U.S. senators, actually from some other states, but have plenty of Hill experience, and took that Hill experience to kind of let our clients know the inside of out of what's going on in Washington, D.C. We do all things from planning their federal agenda to planning trips and holding hands and making sure when they come out to Washington, they're meeting with the right folks and bringing home the bacon, if you would, for their cities and special districts, and more importantly, for their constituents.
And is most of your work focused on local government agencies in California?
Actually, it's exclusively all in California. It is.
Okay.
We've made an effort to with my California roots, and California is what we know. Obviously, we could help in other various states. It's the same work, but the Golden State has a special place in my heart. So that's where our focus is.
So I would imagine that focus gives you certain competitive advantage in terms of translating California issues into Washington, D.C. speak, or vice versa, seeing D.C. through the lens of California. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So obviously California has its unique, obviously positive and negative issues, obviously from disasters when it comes to wildfires and earthquakes along those lines. We have we're dealing with that more than, let's say, a tornado and somebody from Kansas or something like that. So we have a unique aspect of obviously disasters when they do happen and preparing for them. Obviously, we also have a state government that we have to sometimes work with when, obviously there's interactions between the state and the federal level, and knowing those contacts at the state level in terms of with the Newsom administration, when there's a federal overlap is very important. So we have those connections as well as needed. And then obviously the federal agencies all have California offices. So getting to know those California staffers at the federal level who are based either in San Francisco or Oakland or the Los Angeles district office, wherever it might be, is very important. And I think what sets us apart from firms that represent people up and down the entire country, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, I would imagine. I mean, it is, especially given the complexities of California and California local government and the interaction with state level agencies, it helps to know this space very specifically. I know plenty of cities that are, when they start to look for hiring executive talent, they're looking for people with California experience specifically, because it's such a unique beast here in the state to really know the agencies and know the rules and all the little special realities that make California the state that it is. Can you share just some examples of the kind of work you've done for either cities or special districts that you could discuss? Just to really, I love to provide examples. Otherwise, this idea of lobbying sounds very amorphous, right? Or government relations. And I like to make brass tacks out of it. So what's the reality of some of the work you've been able to deliver for some of your clients?
Well, I think one of the biggest things that we do is the federal earmarks, which are back. This is discretionary funds that each Congress member gets 15 projects that it's basically discretionary projects that they get to decide on, the Congress member, and making sure that our cities, number one, are aware that those are out there. And you'd be surprised, there's been a lot of agencies and special districts that before we started working together just weren't applying for just numerous reasons. And I think that's just paramount that we make sure that all of our cities apply every year to both their Congress member and to the 2 U.S. senators. Like I said, those projects could range from infrastructure to road projects to a new fire engine or even new fire station to improvements to a senior center to improvements to a park. It really just comes down to what the city has a focus on, repaving a road or potentially water projects within the city. Up and down the state, we help our cities navigate the process, which obviously there's complexities of the application itself, but then on the back end, setting the city apart because you're competing against other agencies, if it's special districts or the County of Los Angeles, for example, which, we have to compete with the smaller cities and the medium-sized cities against those type of beasts like the city of LA and the city of or the County of Los Angeles, for example. So making sure that our cities stand apart and get that funding is very important. Another thing we do, and we just had one of our cities in last week to Washington, is planning a annual trip, which I think is really important for 2 reasons. Number one, a lot of folks say, "Oh, I know my Congress member," or I know the staff. But the Washington D.C. staff are really the decision makers and the folks that you need to meet. The district staff is great and helpful, but the D.C. staff from the Congress member's office is really, really important. And then meeting with federal agencies to learn about various funding opportunities. A lot of times cities might have an issue. For example, FAA noise complaints that happen often. So meeting with the FAA, for example, maybe there's an issue with the Department of Interior on a water project with the Bureau of Reclamation, for example. So meeting with the DC staff and those different departments is something that we organize on these various trips. So last week, for example, for our city that we helped out, we met with FEMA, the Department of Justice. We are setting up a meeting also for the Department of Interior, the 2 Senate offices, and their Congress member.
Well, it sounds like a tremendous number of meetings, right? Just like the sheer volume of days and back-to-back meetings. I would imagine, I just knowing the Leviathan that is the federal government, even knowing who to meet with and find a meeting with somebody at the right office of the right bureaucracy and the right federal agency must be a nightmare to execute if you aren't living and breathing DC.
No, absolutely. I mean, I think that's kind of the biggest thing that we do. And thank you, Ryder, for that. I think that, from my time on the Hill, Capitol Hill, working in congressional staff, I was able to kind of meet those people and know them from my work. And now I've taken those relationships and turning those into helping my city clients and making sure that they get those meetings with the high-end individuals that really can help them on those problems that they have. Could a city do this on their own? Potentially, but they're, like you said, they're going to have a tough time finding the right person to meet with for whatever issue area it might be.
And at the risk of you giving away your secret sauce, how much time do you spend in DC versus California?
So I'm in DC probably about 80% of the time.
Okay.
I'm in California about 20% of the time. My family's still in California, so out there to see them, and then obviously at the various conferences, Ryder, that I see you at up and down the state. But I'm in DC about 80% of the time. When Congress is in session, I try and be there always, which is about, about 50% of the time Congress is actually in session. And but I grew up in California, went to UC Santa Barbara for undergrad, law school in Los Angeles. So whenever I can make it back to California, I'm always excited to be back home, as I still put it. So.
Well, just like the congressional reps, right? At some point, you can't get fully sucked into the DC life. You got to get back and remember the district you represent. So for your purposes, you got to get back and see the reality on the ground for the various agencies you get to represent too.
And I think that's also really important is I try and make an effort to meet with all my cities when I'm back in California to, obviously make a presence for me, but also to kind of just be on the ground, like you said, and really hearing what's going on. And, if it's visiting, for example, in one of our cities, we're having a problem with the United States Postal Service, with the post office. Going on the ground and seeing the issue firsthand, I think is really important. Obviously, one of my cities, the city of Carson, that we work with about a year and a half ago now, we had a terrible issue with the Dominguez Channel, with the deteriorating and the smell that was going on there.
Yep.
And making sure firsthand that I saw that, and then bringing back, I should say, all of the right folks from the Army Corps of Engineers to the Senate offices to the EPA, making them all weigh into that issue, was something that our firm helped do. So it's a vast, full lobbying. No day is ever the same. As we put it, we're here, and whenever there's an issue that comes up, give us a call. You may not be anticipating this, but we know who to turn to for the helpful hand.
Right. So we're talking federal stuff here. So, and we are a couple weeks now out on the 2024 general election. There's going to be a new presidential administration. There's going to be a new majority in the Senate, and the Republicans have retained their House majority. I suspect this from the inside the castle in D.C. You're watching the machinations go on. You were on the Hill at times when there were transitions and majorities and things of that nature. What's your take? What's your take on what's happening in D.C.? Are people scrambling around with their hair on fire right now? Are they all just trying to figure it out, or is the machine just slowly churning along, doing its deal, ambivalent to the changes that were just voted on by the American people?
Yeah. So, 8 years ago now, I actually worked on the Hill when, Mr. Trump back then became President-elect Trump when he defeated Hillary Clinton in 2016. And I think back then, obviously, folks were shocked during that election. This time around, I think, there was anticipation this was going to be a very, very close race. I think maybe it wasn't as close in the end as a lot of people thought it would be. The entire country, including California, took a right turn, if you would. There's districts such as Riverside and San Bernardino that voted for Joe Biden last time around that are looking like all the votes haven't been counted, but looked like President-elect Trump is going to carry those counties. Orange County was much closer this time around than it has been in quite some time. So the entire country took a right turn, and we were anticipating that to a certain extent. I don't think 312 electoral votes was, what anyone really thought that the president was going to be able to, the president-elect was going to be able to achieve. He won every single battleground state that there was, but I think that, some of these picks that he's had so far for nominations have woken up some folks, if you would. A lot of my friends that work in different government agencies are a little nervous for their own jobs, obviously with Elon Musk's new agency that he's going to be putting together to try and cut government waste, et cetera. So folks are definitely prepared, and I think a little bit nervous though, and across the board though it's sort of business as usual. No matter what happens in Washington, things are going to be the same. We've experienced the Trump administration before, so we kind of know how to work with any administration that's out there. And will things change? Absolutely, but at the end of the day, local governments are still going to be at the table to, get things across the finish line when it comes to infrastructure and disaster funding, et cetera, whatever it might be. That's still going to be on the table. You might hear otherwise, but at the end of the day, the constituents are going to have an outcry if these funding opportunities are cut that dramatically. So,
yeah. Well, I guess this is. In some ways, I feel like we're watching history unfold, right? And this is, by some measures and certainly some opinions, one of the most dramatic changes in political direction, and some of the appointments some of the most dramatic appointments that have been made in terms of representing a change. And if the election, as often is based upon kind of whose represents change, it seems to me anyways that some of these appointments certainly reflect a significant change from the prior administration. From your take, what does that mean at the, I guess, at the federal level for cities? Like, what should they be planning, doing, contemplating? Maybe what risks do you see for cities with some of the change, or is it just too early to anticipate the change? And frankly, they should just be preparing for whatever may come, essentially in, I guess, January, really, which is when Trump would be sworn in and things will start unfolding.
Yeah, so there's a few things. I mean, when it comes to the administration itself, you know, a lot of our daily point of contacts at the different agencies are going to change. For example, last week when we were meeting with the Department of Transportation with the city that was out here, the main staffer, you know, who's been a good friend of ours and a good advocate for cities, he'll be out of a job on January 20th. He's a political appointee. But at the end of the day, the staff under him is going to remain, at least for now. That staff is very, very important to just continue those relationships. You know, we do that for our clients. Sometimes our clients reach out on their own. But, you know, I would encourage, you know, cities that do have a relationship with, you know, if it might be HUD or the Department of Interior or the Department of Energy, whoever their point of contact is, I think just check in with them and just, you know, number one, make sure they're not a political appointee and they're still going to be working come January 20th. And if not, you know, find the right person, ask them to, you know, introduce you to who the new point of contact is going to be. And then when it comes to the House and Senate, I think that we definitely encourage all of our cities to do is congratulate their member of Congress or their member-elect on their victory. So, you know, a lot of times our council and mayors have personal relationships. So even just a simple text from the mayor to the Congress member, you know, congratulating them on their victory. If it's a new Congress member-elect, reaching out to that office who's somewhat forming right now to let them know, hey, we exist. Don't forget City X come January 3rd when we're sworn in, because, you know, that's going to be your ticket to these earmarks that we talked about a little bit earlier. And then finally, I would say what we encouraged our cities to do 4 years ago, it was the middle of COVID back then, if you recall, when Biden took over, but we had the mayor write a letter to the incoming administration, to the president-elect back then, to Joe Biden back then, just congratulating the president on his victory. So I would encourage cities to consider that. I know that a lot of cities in California might be a little upset. The council and the mayor might not see eye to eye with this administration, but reality is that for the next 4 years, we're going to have to work with this administration. And if you can get on their good side early, I think that that's a good opportunity. And if that's a simple letter from your mayor, your council, your city manager to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, just congratulating the president-elect on his victory and saying that, you know, the city looks forward to working with them, that will go a long way. And you can point to that when you do need something later on. So I think that that's what I would do, but also definitely reach out to your government contacts now and just remind them to put you in touch with the right person if, you know, come January 20th, they're not there anymore.
Right. So I want to dive on. I'd like to pick out a couple nuggets here too for, say, some audience members that are working inside cities and trying to but haven't spent a lot of time doing federal related work or have the benefit of your counsel. But I would love to just pick your brain on a couple key points because I think they're important nuances. So my understanding, last I read, maybe there's like 14,000 political appointees that are spread throughout the bureaucracy in DC. Is that correct? Or is it 20? What's the number? Do you know roughly?
Oh, off the top of my head, I don't know the exact number, but it's a ton of political appointees. Some need Senate confirmation, others don't. And it's those folks, those political appointees that, you know, some of those seats won't be filled. Some of those jobs won't be filled. And you're going to have, you know, civil servants taking over those jobs as well, at least for the time being, until those jobs do get filled, if they ever do come back completely. Now, what's interesting is that those civil servants are really the people day in and day out that we work with. And most of those people hopefully aren't going to be changing. Those are the folks at the various agencies that, you know, really do the dirty work, if you would, for our local governments. But a lot of those jobs, Ryder, that you just mentioned, those folks, there's going to be a sea of change. I mean, property values in DC, I mean, who knows what's going to happen with rents, and there's going to be a whole wave of new people coming into Washington come January. So we're with a normal administration, if you would, I would think it would be business as usual. But as we've seen so far, I'm not sure that a normal administration is what we're looking at this time around. So we'll see where the chips fall.
Yeah. And the political appointees, however many there are, they're typically in positions of policy authority, right, setting direction, and then obviously having to live within the guidelines of the regulatory framework that exists at the same time. So the transition of those folks, I would assume, presume would implement potentially a different policy direction, again, within the restrictions of whatever the regulations are, unless new regulations are promulgated. But they're otherwise, they're helping to set direction, tone, and policy is my general sense of it, implementing the will of the administration.
Right. You're going to see obviously a turn from, for example, up and down every single department. You're going to see a move away from climate change, for example. That's a big focus, obviously, on this administration. That is not going to be a focus of these political appointees. It's going to be a move in the total opposite direction. In the last administration of President Trump, climate change was a word that you couldn't even put in documents going out on behalf of the administration. So you're going to see a total change on that. Infrastructure-wise, President Trump, when he was president last time, noted how important infrastructure was, but we didn't really ever get a big infrastructure bill that we got later with President Biden. I think this president going in is going to want to change that. He's going to want to have some legacy on that aspect. So infrastructure and real infrastructure, moving away, from EV charging infrastructure, which the Biden administration has been pushing, to traditional infrastructure, if you would, roads, bridges, things along those lines are going to be a policy change. The Inflation Reduction Act, which has mostly a ton of green incentives in there, is going to be totally revamped, if not totally eliminated altogether. So a lot of those funding opportunities and the direction, like you said, Ryder, of some of the words that are used and some of the priorities this administration it's going to be night and day.
Yeah, I would assume that would also affect some of the directions of federal grant monies and how people are applying for federal grant monies.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of grants that, for example, the Department of Transportation the other day, a lot of that money's already dried up, and it's not going to come back for some of the more, liberal grants, if you would, that the Biden administration pushed, which, obviously had impacts in a lot of the communities in California. Grants right now are really flourishing under this administration, and I think they're going to take a step back in the next administration. That's how important those earmarks really are, because the president can't really control those. That's done at the House and Senate level, and if those earmarks are really, really discretionary and really, really important to bring home for our city. So we're going to see a push maybe more to those, and grant opportunities are going to potentially change. Now, again, I'm not sure they even know what they're going to do yet, but
right.
all of this is pending January 20th and the months ahead.
Yeah, fair enough. Right. I mean, I realize for you've been through the transition to a prior Trump administration and back to the Biden administration, so you have experience and wisdom from within inside the borders of DC, and I think that's partly what clients could benefit from tapping into, is understanding that perspective and how to navigate those issues. So but at the end of the day, we're all watching history happen right now. So
right.
we get to experience it together. You just may have more insights than we do. Plus, you're on the ground in DC, so you get to report back.
No, and the gentleman from the Department of Transportation that I was just speaking of, he's going to be replaced by somebody new. And it's starting that relationship with that person. We have those relationships from the last administration. We were going to probably see a lot of folks from the prior Trump administration come back to their old position, or at least back to the agency itself. I was actually talking to a friend the other day who was at DOT under Elaine Chao, and under the new transportation secretary, he hopes to return. So, it's those relationships that we have that our clients will benefit from, and introducing our clients to those folks to make sure that they stand out, and when those grants, if they do come back, they have a higher leg up potentially on those. So we will see.
Right. Well, I guess one general point I'm partly hearing here is a tone of neutrality and focus on just making things work, right? So at the end of the day, regardless of perhaps who you voted for or what your stances were on the presidential election, you're gonna, to the extent you want to try to work with DC to make things happen, it's probably better to start neutral and go from there than to come in guns a-blazing one way or the other.
No, absolutely, Ryder. I can't argue that enough, because right now we've already seen the borders are that Trump's going to be working with, say that cities and states that work on sanctuary cities, et cetera. They're going to be at the chopping block when it comes to funding, according to him. So if you take him on his word at that, I wouldn't advise my clients to start that fight potentially. I mean, I know that there's a passion at a lot of the local level for this, but at the end of the day, if it's, I would take this border czar at his word. So,
right. Yeah, and fair enough. And I guess perhaps also to be fair to you, your job is to remain politically neutral as well, and just be helpful to whoever it is to carry the message and to provide them access to the right people in DC. So you're not exactly taking I would assume not taking a stance either, getting too politically fired up one way or the other.
No, I mean, obviously we're a bipartisan firm. We have both sides of the aisle covered. I mean, obviously, I think people know where politically I am sometimes, but at the end of the day, no matter what, the work continues, and our client's success is the most important thing. And we need to just stay as neutral as possible and just make sure that our cities, special districts, counties, whoever it might be, move forward and succeed no matter who's the president.
Right. Well, and there's also just a number of issues for cities, special districts that are entirely devoid of politics, right? I mean, filling potholes, building bridges, putting in new sewer systems and water treatment plants, like all the basic elements of civilization must go on. And, that's, I would imagine, a big chunk of the business you're doing, especially with your special district representation.
No, absolutely. With our special district, water projects are obviously big things. We represent. It's interesting. We have a cemetery district even that we help them get funding for a project within the cemetery from their Congress member, which was the first time that a cemetery district in quite some years has ever received an earmark before. We also work with a lot of fire agencies, fire districts, if you would, and these fire districts depend on this funding for apparatus or even new stations. And I will tell you, the fire is going to happen no matter who's in the White House. And we just need to make sure that, we have the tools, literally and figuratively, to make sure that our special districts and our cities, for that matter, are well equipped to put out the fire. So
yeah, literally, that makes sense. So I want to go back to one other thing too that I think is an important nuance to explain, and doing it in a fashion, obviously, that's recognizing that district staff versus DC office staff have different roles to play. But I think you could provide some helpful information for folks in local government to really understand the unique roles they play. Could you talk about that a little bit, just so
Sure.
people understand? Like, as you mentioned, it's great to have a know your district person, but the folks at the DC office might have their more ear to the ground on certain political realities or what's going on legislatively or in the regulatory environment that folks in the district office may not. So there's just talk about those kind of juxtapositions between the district staff versus DC staff.
Sure. So the district staff, and this is just general, tend to focus on more casework, obviously organizing the Christmas parade, if you would, that the Congress member is going to be part of. I mean, obviously there's a much more to it than that, but the DC staff is really, really the one shaping policy. And whenever I have an issue, I generally start at the DC office level. Almost exclusively, the DC office is in charge of the earmarks. Sometimes you'll have the district staff, maybe go out on a tour of, let's say the water project, or go see the road firsthand and report back to DC and saying, oh yeah, this road really needs to be repaved. But at the end of the day, the DC staff, because that's where the appropriation staff is, they're going to be the ones talking to the committee folks to push these earmarks across the finish line. We're having an issue right now with the city with HUD, and we had to turn to the Washington, D.C. HUD office because at the local level, they were getting nowhere. And I tell you, when that 202 number from HUD comes across from someone at the district office in L.A., they're going to pick it up and they're going to listen to whoever that is and make sure that problem's solved. So, and then obviously the Congress member themselves, that's where they're with their colleagues, right? So that's where they're hearing, the Congress members are hearing what's going on across the federal government. When they're back in the district, sometimes they're on leisure mode. Sometimes the Congress member obviously is doing tours and things like that. But in DC, that's where the real political fights are going on. And I think that's the staff that you really need to get that relationship with, the chief of staff, the legislative director. And then obviously it is important for the district director. I'm actually a former district director myself. So I after my time in DC, I came back and worked in a congressional office back in Southern California. So I have a unique perspective of seeing both worlds. But at the end of the day, I will tell you as well, as a district staffer, I got outvoted by the DC office most of the time. So.
Well, it's good to be able to speak from experience, but that's partly being able to speak from experience is exactly why cities, counties, special districts call you up and ask for help. So,
right.
That's I appreciate you being willing to share that insight and observation. Any other comments about policy areas with particular, given your focus on California, specific to California, and change in federal policy and majorities in the Senate as well, that you'd like to at least highlight, or hard to predict, but foreshadow areas that people should be thinking about or chewing on as they look towards 2025?
So I think that number one, we're going to see a focus, and I think that California spoke on the, obviously the DA's race in Los Angeles County, what we saw up in Oakland with the recall, and in the mayor's race in San Francisco. I think public safety is going to be a big issue that the administration and the House and Senate are really going to focus on. And I think that, I hear from a lot of my cities that they have been frustrated at times with sort of, the lack of interest, if you would, from the current administration on this issue. And I think that's going to change. And I think that's an issue where if a city's, and a lot of cities I do work with are very, adamant on homelessness and reducing crime. I think that's somewhere where they can have common ground with this administration on, and potentially be part of reform that goes on there. And as I noted, a lot of these green, climate issues are going to change considerably. We are going to see reduced funding across the board. I mean, you might even have the Inflation Reduction Act repealed completely. I mean, obviously you might leave some of the things in there, but that is huge for cities because there's a ton of grant money in there for cities. And when it comes to, energy efficiency and whatever it might be, I would say just be prepared for that.
Yeah.
And then I think finally, Ryder, when it comes to working with the current Newsom administration and sort of how our cities tie that into the White House, I think that there's going to be obviously some disagreements there.
Yeah.
to say the least.
Yeah.
But I think, as you mentioned earlier, the neutrality aspect is something that I always push because I'm not trying to make any enemies in Washington for our clients. And, let Sacramento be Sacramento sometimes. I think the responsibility of the mayor and the council and the city managers is to our constituents, to our residents. And, for the next 4 years, we're going to be at the forefront in Washington. And we've been dealt some cards that maybe that your city and your residents don't agree with, but these are the cards that we have. So let's make the best out of it.
Yeah, that's sage advice. I appreciate that, Jayson. How can people find you? What's the easiest way for people to find you?
So, obviously, Ryder, I'm in a ton of conferences, as you know. Look forward to meeting anyone and everyone across California at those. Feel free to give me a call. My phone number, still have a California area code. It's area code 562-818-6646. Call or text me whenever. And then my email address is jbraude@KileyAssociates.org. I'll spell that. It's J, B like boy, R-A, U, D like David, E like Edward, at KileyAssociates.org.
Kiley is K-I-L-E-Y.
Yes, Kiley, associates.org. No space or anything in between those two.
I'll have my production team also throw that into the description on YouTube and other details in the podcast as well, so that people can find that in the details.
Right, and seriously, I'm always welcome to have a conversation with any city, special district, county that just wants to talk, needs any sort of advice. Obviously, we'll do an initial consultation just to kind of hear what's going on at no cost to your city and go from there.
Excellent. Well, I've heard very good things from cities that I know work with you, which is how I mentioned I even heard your name in the first place, was some cities bragging about the work you've done with them in DC on their behalf. So it's great to have you on the podcast. And that's today's report. My thanks to Jayson for joining us. From the whole Public CEO team and myself, Ryder Todd Smith, thank you for your time. We hope you learned something new and inspiring that will help you in your public service. Remember, Public CEO has a daily newsletter that is free to those who sign up at PublicCEO.com. Thank you for tuning in to this edition of the Public CEO Report. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing across all of our platforms so you never miss out on this great content. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, and Amazon Music.